Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Body Wisdom Podcast. I'm so excited for today's episode with my friend Kymber. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks for coming on. I'm so excited for our listeners to get to know you and your story and what you're here to share. So I guess before we get started, for anyone who's not familiar with you and your work, would you mind just by starting off with like a little bit of background and how you landed in the space?
Sure, yeah. So I am a holistic nutritionist. Sometimes I will refer to myself as a functional nutritionist because I have some functional training and I tend to take that approach to nutrition. I'm also a women's health coach. And so I've been in the last 3 or 4 years building a business as a nutrition consultant and health coach. In the last 2 years, I started working specifically with women and launched an ebook about the importance of eating animals for women's mental and behavioral health, and then launched a women's health course in the last year and a half. And so I think definitely like in the last year and a half, I've really ramped it up with getting to know women's bodies, getting to know like the large macro level issues that women are facing when it comes to their health, and something that I feel really passionate about. And I feel like it's an underrepresented area of health, women, just like what happens to women's bodies and in this culture specifically. And so, yeah, it's something that I feel really excited to talk about. And I have been told also I'm like very, very cerebral and intellectual. And so I kind of bring that like more masculine, intellectual, critical thinking perspective to the area of, to the field of women's health and nutrition.
I love that because we need that for sure. Sometimes it's just like,
Yeah, very
that's so
flowy and like,
feminine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have to get into that too. Like that's something that I work on a regular basis to not be such a heady woman. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of room for growth for women in understanding what differentiates them from men. And that's something that I feel very strongly about, that I feel is lacking in this culture.
Yeah.
It was even like taboo. So in some way.
Is this somehow connected to your story and how like you grew up and any health struggles that you faced?
Yeah, definitely. So I had kind of an unconventional upbringing. My parents were in a religious group, and I never officially married, and we were all like unassisted. I'm in the middle of 5 children, and we're all unassisted home births. Didn't see doctors, unschooled. And my parents had kind of a rocky relationship. And so when I was about 8, my mom left and my dad raised us. And my mom was in and out, which ties into my attachment stuff we can talk about. But my mom was in and out. And then, basically my dad raised us. And so it was a man raising 4 women and 1 boy. And my dad's very permissive and very effeminate himself, very emotional. He's a writer. He's very like creative type. And so there was a lot of like lack of structure, lack of authority, lack of a strong patriarch in the household. And so I see a lot of my issues of just like, being really strong-willed, kind of running my own life, not feeling like I can release control, not really understanding my body as a female, that those themes tended to play out in my life. And so I was never like inherently masculine in the sense that like I wanted to be a guy or people would just define me necessarily, like describe me as masculine, but energetically looking back, I was always very heady and very kind of disconnected from what it meant to be a woman. Like I had no one there to tell me what it means to have a woman's body, what it means to be a girl, what it means to go through menarche and to, have sexual desires and how to care for yourself. And then I also like my career background and first stint in college was early child development and infant care. And so I also have like some biases because I have worked in a lot of female-centric industries, and I've never really felt like men were oppressing me or like I needed to compete with men. So I've kind of gone through life feeling like I've been doing these very feminine jobs, but also not really understanding my personal role in it since I didn't really have like a strong foundation for understanding myself as a woman, if that makes sense.
It does. It
Yeah.
does.
So there's some
So
things that I did. Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead. I want you to finish your sentence.
I was just going to say there's some things that I did not participate in, which I feel really grateful for. Like I never took hormonal birth control. I was never really into casual sex, or like there's just certain things that in this culture that are becoming more for women signs of liberation that I don't actually agree with. And I just never really participated in those things. However, I did, even as a health-oriented woman working in birth work, I was also a postpartum doula for many years. I still didn't really understand my own cycle. I didn't really understand myself as a woman. I kind of thought of like tracking ovulation and fertility as just this thing that my like kind of more crunchy, effeminate friends in the Bay Area would do, or if you're like intentionally trying to get pregnant. And so it wasn't even until my early 30s, and especially in the last 2 years when I started working with women, that I started to realize how many aspects of my own womanhood and femininity had never really been developed. And it's like a cultural problem. I think it's a cultural problem, but I just happen to have this kind of like backstory of being raised by a man to make it more personal for me, I guess.
Yeah. So how have you started to, I mean, yes, through your own work, you started to discover these parts of yourself, but I guess how are you bringing the feminine more into practice on a day-to-day basis today so that it feels more like integrated with the masculine?
Yeah. Well, practicing feeling, I guess, just like allowing myself. I have, despite being really heady, I have a lot of big feelings and I feel things really intensely. And allowing myself, like actually practicing feeling, sitting with my feelings, dancing, doing different forms of movement, doing just embodiment practices. So I do a lot of, every day I do different dances and like on my own. I used to be part of a larger community of like ecstatic dance, if you've ever heard of that. And I'm really excited to like, because I'm going to be moving back to the Bay Area in a month and a half, to be back in that community again, to have kind of like a larger group of people that do that. But right now it's mostly kind of just like individual work, somatic therapy that I do. And one of my favorite things actually is to go to the beach. Like I grew up on the beach, I grew up surfing, and where I'm currently living, we have this little private nude beach that I've been going to since I was a teenager. And that's one of my like sacred healing places where I can go and be naked and like swim in the ocean naked and lay out and get my breast tan. And I'm going to have a hard time moving away from that for sure. I'll have to come back to that. But yeah, so like spending a lot of time in my body. Like I spend a lot of time naked, like when I'm, doing work that doesn't require people see me. I'm not wearing very much clothing. That's been something that has been a big part of my healing journey, is just being naked. I grew up again, like very much in my head, never overweight, but had an eating disorder and body dysmorphia. So I would disassociate a lot, go into my intellect. And so now I use just like having access to my body, anchoring in my body, wearing less clothing, being able to like feel myself and look at myself in the mirror. And then with certain friends that I feel safe with, to do that as well. That's a big part of me, reconnecting and reclaiming my body as a woman.
So you name all of these things, and I'm curious, was it easy to start doing these things, especially as someone who spent a lot of time in her head? Was it just easy to just be in your body?
I think it's been a process. I don't think it was super easy. I look back at like my late teens and my early 20s, and I had a lot of anxiety. This is actually part of my story too, was I was vegan for the first 5 years of my 20s, and I was doing a lot of meditation. I was actually trying to bypass the entire experience of having a body. So I went on a lot of silent retreats and, had like a Buddhist teacher and a Buddhist community in San Francisco. And my health deteriorated so much on a vegan diet that sitting and meditating became really difficult. And so, and just having the amount of anxiety that I would have from being malnourished, basically. And so it was, I think, the second half of my 20s when I started reintroducing animal foods, which really like grounded me and gave me my period back, slowed me down, stabilized my blood sugar. that actually made me, it made it easier for me to stick around in my body. Because I do believe a lot of us disassociate because there's something missing in our nervous system, like a nutrient piece, or, something that will allow us to feel safe staying in our bodies. And so that was definitely a part of it. And then the ecstatic dance and contact improv, if you've heard of that.
I haven't. What is that?
Highly recommend looking that up. So a few people have asked me recently what it is, and I'm just trying to think of how to describe it. So it's an international community, and it kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of ecstatic dance. Like you'll see a lot of people who are in the ecstatic dance community also do contact improv. And it's a way of moving. It's a movement practice that involves other people. So it's a lot of like learning to lead and follow, touching in like very specific ways. You can do it individually with one person. You can do it in groups. And so I used to be part of that community in the Bay Area, and there would just be like contact parties where everyone is just practicing touching each other. It was a very, very like tactile, physical community where you start to learn boundaries. You have to learn how to get into your body in order to follow and to lead, and just to kind of like know where you're at and whether you want to be touched by a particular person. And so that taught me a lot about like trusting myself, like being able to be centered and trusting myself and knowing that I can follow, because I have a really hard time following, like relinquishing control.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so those, I think the second half of my 20s, and then, the first few years of my 30s really helped me like solidify myself in my body and make peace with food and feel, I think for the first time, what it means to have a woman's body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that you said that, because I know for myself, whenever like I share something on social media about being in your body, or like dancing even, or meditating, or whatever it is, and with my client work, a lot of the women I see don't see it as so easy to get in their bodies and stay in their bodies, right? To have this embodied feeling. And I also want to say, like, it's not their fault. Like, and we can also take responsibility, because when trauma happens, there's this disembodiment that takes place.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I love that you said that it's a process, because it is. It's like everything else. It's a process. It's a practice. It's a titration as well. It's not going from 0 to 100. There's this saying in somatic healing that goes like, trauma moves fast, so healing must be slow. And I love that so much, because yeah, even when we're like doing all of the protocols and doing all of the things like in the alternative health space, I see it the same way. I'm like, usually someone, and this was me too, like who is like, give me this, give me that, give me that. And I want to do this. I got to do that. And then it's like, almost like you're running out of breath. I don't know. I just can so relate. And I didn't realize that there was just so much underneath there that hadn't been felt yet. And so I love how you brought the feeling into the equation, because feeling your feelings, it sounds so easy and simple, but gosh, like so many of us, myself included, don't, or I used to feel this way, don't know how to even go about doing that, where to start feeling your feelings. So I love that you brought that up. And I want to connect the dots back to, so would you say like your trauma, if you want to call it trauma, I know trauma is also like this word that has been almost overused recently, but also like, not to dismiss anyone who's had trauma. Trauma is not an event in it of itself, but it's the lack of an empathic witness, or basically how it left your system. But how did that impact your health and relationships moving forward?
Yeah, in a lot of ways. Like I'm working with my third, I did somatic experiencing with 2 different practitioners in my 20s. And then now I'm working with my third. And as I'm 36, so as someone in her like mid 30s, that's more developed and more intentional with her life, it's profound how much is coming up, because I think I'm more available for the work. And so I can look back now and see how much patterns I had from really early on that are showing up in these subtle or not so subtle ways. And so my mother leaving, and this is, again, I think this is pretty common when you have a parent, especially a mother figure, that abandons you or that leaves, that feeling of that severing, that like mother hunger can so deep, it can run so deep. And so for me, I would have like really big feelings. Like I would like take up a whole room with my feelings when I was a child, like have tantrums, and no one would come because my parents were they just had too much on their plate and my mom wasn't available. So then no one would come. So what I would do is I would cry it out and make a big scene. And then I would eventually bring myself back down and like go out and apologize. Like I would take care of myself in a way, which obviously as you're a child, you can't really do that. So there's like dissociation that happens and internalizing the experience and stuff. And so throughout my life, I've noticed that shows up in different ways. And so when I was a teenager, it showed up as like self-destructive behavior, like I would drink or party, or I was bulimic for several years. And so kind of like having these really big feelings and not having the resources to name them or even fully feel them. So going up into my head and thinking, and then doing something, reaching for something external to take the pressure off, to like allow myself to feel some relief from having those big feelings.
Right.
And so, and the way that showed up in my like evolving relationship patterns as an adult is very anxious attachment style. So getting involved, having a pattern of getting involved with men that kind of mimic some of the patterns of my mother. So like avoidance, and then getting those wounds triggered, having these like really big outsized feelings. So getting really loud in some way, whether that's, writing a long text or whatever. And then when they can't meet me because they don't have the skills to meet that, kind of like self-soothing if you can, or more just like suppressing. And then so eventually like having these like building, nothing's really fully resolved. And that can create a lot of problems in your intimate relationships, obviously. And so over the years, like I have noticed that through the somatic experiencing, through the embodiment work, I've gotten a lot better at feeling my feelings and naming them. And some of the things that, you learn in somatic experiencing that you take with you, which is just this profound work, is shaking, moving around. Like I'm really, really big on eye contact. So when I'm connecting with someone, I look in their eyes a lot, like I anchor. And I notice that that's one of the reasons that people come to me, because they feel very seen and I'm very present with them. And that's a skill that I developed through being with discomfort, through being with like really big feelings and kind of like riding those nervous system waves. And so, so now I'm at this place where I can see that my nervous system, although I'm still healing and I can actually see the improvements and the security that has been developed, I can still see that my nervous system is sensitive from my early childhood in a way that makes my choice of partners very important. And so choosing someone that has some kind of avoidance patterns that they're not working on, that they're not aware of, can really like hijack my nervous system, even after all that work. So it's a really interesting thing to notice now as an adult, like how even if we do healing work and we do work towards security and resolution, and there's certain imprints that we can have when we're younger that can stay with us, that can actually dictate who becomes our medicine and who becomes our poison. And so that's definitely that's kind of where my lesson is right now with relationships, just like being really intentional with who I choose to let in. And intentional relationships are absolutely essential for me at this point.
That's big. And relationships make up, I can't remember, there was like this percentage or like this scale of like how important relationships are when it comes to like our health. I know for me, speaking for myself, what really led me to this space was my almost 10-year relationship, where I had an anxious attachment style, and, we could go into like childhood and everything. And gosh, like the symptoms that manifested from being in that chronic state of fight or flight for almost 10 years, that is really what kind of forced me into this space and led me to dig deeper into my symptoms. And that's kind of like why I'm so passionate about intertwining somatics and nutrition together, because both are as equally important for the nervous system, right? But yeah, that just resonates so big. So I love that for you, and that you're choosing intentional relationships, whether it be romantic or non-romantic. Yeah, I'm assuming everything.
Yeah.
It makes such a big difference in the state of our health. And sometimes, like, that's not something I knew right off of the bat, right? That's not something that I was taught growing up. But sometimes that's just kind of like the lesson that is needed to be learned at some point in our lives.
Yeah.
So with your anxious attachment style, and so is that something that you still resonate with that today?
Yes. And it varies depending on who I'm with. Because I've had secure partners that I'm still best friends with, they're like people that I still confide in and have intimate relationship with. So it really does. I've done enough work and I'm continuing to do work. Like right now I'm doing parts work with my
Love.
she's doing the woman that I'm currently working with. She's wonderful. I've only had a few sessions and I feel like I've been broken open. And she does, I wish I knew the name of it. It's a mixture of attachment therapy and somatic experiencing. She also does parts work.
That's interesting. I haven't heard
Yeah.
that.
So far it's been the most powerful. And again, I'm so intellectual that I can go in my head and just like talk and very articulate, and that doesn't really get in there, and like help you see what's actually going on. And so the attachment stuff, it's tricky because you have to be very cautious. You have to be very conscious of signals of insecure attack, like avoidance. I think if you're someone who has a more anxious long-term pattern, it's important to be aware of signals of avoidance early on. And I find that sometimes I'm not still. And that can be difficult because if you attach yourself to someone who has unconscious, patterns in and of themselves are not a sign that you shouldn't be in a relationship with someone. It's more of, are they conscious and are they being worked on? And unfortunately, with strong avoidance patterns, they're less likely to be aware of them because that's the nature of avoidance. And so that's something that I have found, that regardless of all of the work that I've done, if I get involved with someone, and we can talk about like the role that sex plays in that, because that's a really fun topic. If I get involved with someone and we get really physically intimate, I can miss those signals of their avoidance. And I require a lot of depth and a lot of like emotional
Intimacy
and safety. Like that's really, really important to me. And so without that, like my anxious stuff will get triggered for sure. And I know that, like I tell, new partners that too. I'm very much aware of it. But it's more a matter of, if someone else isn't really versed in what that actually means, they're just not going to have the skills to meet you when you get triggered.
Yeah. And I find it interesting that anxious attachment styles tend to just somehow find themselves in relationship with avoidant partners. I mean, that was me. And yeah, it was like this constant clashing, because I was like desperately asking for something that could never, ever be met because this person had this attachment style. And so that led to this tumultuous relationship that was not healthy in any sense. And so I'm curious, how did sex like play a role in all that?
Yeah. Well, I do believe that there is room for change and room for growth. I think that attachment styles are a spectrum. They're not really like a box that we can be put in. And I have a lot of faith in growth, even if it's like slightly naive. So I would say that sex triggers so many things for so many of us. And it's such a deep, unconscious way of bonding, because you're tapping into all the stuff that's stored in your body and you're sharing that. And a lot of it is actually unconscious. And so it can be, and especially, I also think that there's biological differences between men and women that are kind of downplayed these days. So we have this culture where we want men and women to be equal, and we confuse equal with sameness. And although I do think that casual sex can, and unconscious, unintentional sex can harm anyone, I also think that it harms women more than it harms men. And so I think that a lot of women have anxious attachment styles they're not fully aware of. And when they participate in unintentional or casual sex or unsafe sex in the sense of like nervous system safety, then they run the risk of increasing their level of anxiety and their attachment, triggering their attachment wounds in a way that's not helpful. And so I found that to be the case with myself. And I learned early on, like, especially in that second half of my 20s, when I was doing more like physical, doing dance and contact improv, going to Burning Man. I was in several open relationships and learned so much about my boundaries and about intimacy and the importance of communication and safety. And I just learned that sex is such a seriously profound portal into our subconscious that it's not something that I can just do with anyone. And so I've become much more serious about who I sleep with. And like the standards for what kind of sex is enjoyable for me has gone consistently up. And part of that, I think, is my growing awareness of my nervous system reactions and this attachment, our attachment systems that are very, very real. And I think that some people attach more deeply or intensely than others. Like some people just have more, some people are more kinesthetic, some people are more physical. I'm incredibly physical. And so I lean into attachment and I attach really intensely and pretty quickly too. And so because I know that about myself, I'm super mindful of who I choose to sleep with.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that I don't make mistakes though. And so definitely like and I'm also a very, very sexual person. Like I really enjoy sex. So it's a very interesting mixture of like really enjoying sex and having like this profound relief of getting out of her head, getting into her body to be able to enjoy her body and connect in this way. And also knowing that there's a greater level of responsibility for who you do that with.
Mm-hmm.
So, so that's something that I've been working on and have been experiencing over the last few years. And my last relationship, actually, which was probably one of the most like profound relationships I've ever had as far as like nervous system reactions and attachment stuff, that taught me so much. If you're open to hearing about.
Oh yeah, please.
A little bit about that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, it's kind of personal, but it's also, it's like, there's just so many lessons there. So my last relationship only lasted about 4 months and we met online and it was long distance. But it was like immediately very, very physical. Like we had a lot of chemistry. We both agreed that we wanted a very physical relationship. He took on the role of my dominant and I took on the role of a sub, which is like something that I've been wanting for years. And so there's a lot, I don't know if you know much about those kinds of dynamics, but
not really. No.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of ideas about it. And then there's so many different ways that it can play out. It's basically like a role playing within the relationship where you take on, a particular energetic, role. And so the dominant has more, and again, like this is very personal. So people can have different flavors of this dynamic. There's a lot of people who do it in a very casual way, and that was not me from the beginning. But it's basically like you're relinquishing a certain level of control to someone else and you're surrendering. And so the way that I was first kind of introduced to the dom sub dynamic, even though it's part of like BDSM, I actually got the first conception of it and experience of it through David Data's work, if you're familiar with him.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's not like a BDSM guy, but he does talk a lot about the sexual polarity and the masculine and the feminine. Mm-hmm. And for me, there's a lot of overlap between like a dominant who's in his masculine and a feminine who's in her a woman who's in her feminine and she's surrendering. Mm-hmm. And so me and my partner kind of took on those roles and talked a lot about the energetics and the emotional and again, like lots of trust and we were long distance and he made a lot of mistakes. I mean, we both made a lot of mistakes, but I think he was not honest. And like, again, when you're long distance, you have 4 hours between each other. And so he had sex with other people and kept it for me. And also he's a sober alcoholic. And so he was drinking. And so these are things that like really would violate trust in like a normal relationship, quote unquote normal. But like, because we had this really strong dynamic that like was very almost like emotional and body centered, it felt almost like a spiritual calling for me to surrender and to trust this person and to like relinquish control. And we're talking like physical control too. So when we were together, he's much bigger than me and he had physical control over me. Like, you know, he would tie me up. He would lead me. It's hard to explain without painting a particular picture in someone's mind of what that means, but it wasn't a performance. It was very authentic. It was very, it was a dance. And we fell in love really quickly. And so we were planning on like moving in together when my lease was up, which, you know, was at the beginning of July. So that would have given us an extra 6 months of seeing each other afar. And as soon as we started to plan for that, he kind of freaked out and pulled back and broke up with me. And so January, February were just like really difficult months emotionally for me. And we stayed in touch and over the months. And then it became clear to me that he was avoidant, like more and more, because he did not show up as avoidant in the 4 months that we were dating. And so like he showed up as very secure, and he even told me that he, you know, based on his like quiz that he had taken or something, that he was secure. But now it's really clear that he's like fearful avoidant. And so what started to happen as we continued to stay in communication, it became more and more clear how toxic it was for my nervous system to be in communication with him, because I still had this like desire to surrender to him, but that safety in that container was no longer there. And so it was like, I didn't really know my role. I didn't know how to interact with him. He would get really sexual really quickly, because that was like a source of bonding for us when we were like in this safe love space. But like that, and so that would like reel me in, and we would have phone sex. And then I would feel really confused and like emotionally in pain afterwards. And so I learned so much about like how much goes on in your body when you have a physical relationship with someone that completely bypasses your intellectual, like your reason, you know. And I like pride myself on being pretty good at critical thinking and being able to rationalize and do, you know what the logical thing to do is. But when you have those patterns running in your body, that's way stronger than anything that you could possibly think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The
Yeah.
body knows. And so I'm curious how you, like, I don't know, just coped with that after the breakup. Like after everything that happened, having had that anxious attachment style, how did you soothe? How did you heal from that?
I cried a lot. Like I was like a little girl. I would like, I would go to the beach and I would cry. I would like be with girlfriends and I would cry. That was like a large part of what I did, was I just like allowed myself to like fully feel those like deep, dark, ugly emotions. And I worked, like I put myself into my business, and I just spent a lot of time with other women, like for the first time. And I have had, you know, like some deep female relationships over the years, but that was the first time in this last like 7 months that I've really leaned into sisterhood. Online with like colleagues and just women that I work with, clients, but also like the women in my life, like they've became my anchor. And that was so beautiful for the first time, realizing that like women, that's also another aspect of I think the growth of my business is growing up having been raised by a man. I've always empathized with men. Like I've never been one of those like man-hating feminists, or like I've always empathized with men and just kind of wanted to understand more of their process and their behaviors. And I've always felt a little bit less empathetic towards women. And so in the last few years, and especially this last like 8 months, I have just been like broken open to women and to like what they go through and what they feel and their sensitivities, and both on like an individual and also like on a macro level. And so that allowed me to give myself empathy for what I was going through. And I talked to a lot of women. I mean, women talk, that's like what we do with each other. Right. And so I confided in a lot of women over, you know, what happened with Ryan. Like a lot of women know about him.
Wow. Thanks for reflecting that back to me, because I just realized I would empathize with men so much, almost. I wonder if I was almost to a fault. I don't know. But I never did that with women. I was always like best friends with the guys in high school and had very few like female friendships. Even the ones I did have were like catty, and we were talking behind each other's backs. So it wasn't this like solid like female friendship, like I got you no matter what, like I'm here for you, and there's trust. But there was more like betrayal and lies and all of that. And so the sisterhood wound was really, really deep for me too. And it hasn't been until recently that I've really started to notice the shifts that are happening in my body, because I'm leaning more into sisterhood than I ever have before. Just like energetically, my body just feels different and lighter, and I make jokes and I receive jokes well, or I don't know, like I feel more comfortable in my body, and like all these little things that I didn't have before because sisters weren't there. And sisters were always something I wanted biologically. And I believe you have, is that what you had, like three
Right.
sisters?
I have 3 sisters. Yeah.
That's amazing. Do you find them close as well, or not?
Yeah, we're close. My family has a lot of issues, like a lot of drug use. And so my family, we love each other. We just don't have like a strong unit. We're all kind of like off on our own, figuring ourselves out. And then we come together occasionally. And so we text each other every once in a while, but we're not as close as I would like us to be, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And the sisterhood wound it's such a real thing in this culture and modern society. And last summer I had a medicine trip with LSD, and I went into my sister wound and ended up having like this profound experience of grieving what women have gone through throughout history. I'm like getting goosebumps.
Oh my gosh.
Really profound. Like I still can have flashes of it if I'm like driving in my car and some really like strong feminine, like Tori Amos or Fiona, something comes on, and I'll start crying again, feeling this. I had this like deep embodied feeling of like women throughout history, their struggles, and like how many people are here today because a woman at some point in their lineage was raped. And emotion. Yeah. And just like I felt that for the first time of just like what it means to be a woman, to have a woman's body, to have like to feel all of the ways that we're weak, that we feel unsafe, that we feel the need to, because I do believe there is such thing as like toxic femininity. Like everyone fixates on toxic masculinity, but like there is this toxic element of a woman or of the feminine that's like, needing to manipulate with like our sexual energy, needing to like put each other down, gossip. And so just like all of that happening in women, like reverting to that because we don't feel safe. And so, yeah, it shifted things immensely for me, like in the way that I feel towards women. And I feel like since then, my business has grown substantially. Like, my income has grown substantially. The women that reach out to me and want to collaborate with me and like form a sisterhood around work has been beautiful, it's something that I didn't even have to try hard for. It just kind of showed up in my lap. And I think part of that is this like healing that I've done with myself and forgiving myself and forgiving my mom for, the ways that she just did not have it. She also was a product of this culture and never really had her own life. She started having children when she was 18. And my dad was much older and she didn't really know what she was doing. And so she gave her entire life to having children and then just, kind of lost, kind of like had a experience in her 30s where she was like, I can't do it anymore, and that's when she left. But she has to live with that for the rest of her life. The fact that she left her children, that's a huge, huge burden to carry.
So you haven't spoken to her since?
Oh no, now we have a relationship for sure.
Oh, you do? Oh
yeah. And I think also it's interesting just to note that like the healing work that you do is for everyone in your life. Like it's not just for you. And of all my siblings, I have the closest relationship with her because because of the work that I've done and my ability to forgive her and, have compassion for what she was going through, empathize with who she was and who she is, and to have her in my life and give her the opportunity to be my mother again. And that's something that like not all my siblings have have been open to.
Do you think that's allowed for any shifts to take place in the anxious attachment style? Like having your mom back in your life, like did that anything happen from that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I definitely think so. I think that it's still there, partly because my mom has a lot of healing work that she may never do. And so we do have boundaries, like there is elements of avoidance there with her that, that's just, unfortunately, like not everyone gets the opportunity to do their healing work in their lifetime. And so that's kind of how I feel with her, but she definitely like makes an effort and, is doing her best, with the skill set that she has. I think the mother wound is such a deep one for so many people. And it's a driving force in a lot of addictive behavior. And so it is something that I look at a lot and like work on, and I can actually talk to her about it. Like we have that level of honesty with each other that my siblings don't really have. It's one of those things where if you don't forgive someone for the things they've done, it's going to be really hard to even talk to them about the things they've done, because the place that you're coming from is it's a place of pain. So you're just like giving them your pain over and over.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
It does.
So then you just have a very superficial relationship with the person, because you can't actually like, you're totally having to consistently avoid the thing you need to confront.
I love that you're bringing up the mother wound, because this was just something that I thought I didn't have. And I apologize if you guys, can you hear my dogs in the background? Because they're like going, okay, good. I'm glad, because they're like going crazy. I always thought I had this deep father wound, which I think is definitely prominent, but the person who I became most anxious without was my mother. When she wasn't there, but the thing is, she was always there. She was always, always, always there. She was my safety. Never wanted to leave her side. But if she left for a second, like I'd be like, no. And so with or without a mother, I think someone can still have a mother wound, right?
Oh, for sure.
And like even, I guess.
Because it's the person that brought you into the world. I mean, I guess it depends on when you say with or without a mother, like you didn't have them at all, like they were not there from birth on, but it's that person that brought you into the world that you, and this is, again, this is such a fascinating topic, because I studied early child development and infant development. So like I worked for over a decade with infants, newborns, and small children. So I got to see attachment work was like a big part of that. And I got to see in real time, like what happens to babies when they're not looked at enough, like their nervous system reactions to not being held or to being held, and how they communicate their needs. And so it could be something subtle. You could have a mother that's there and she just doesn't look at you enough. She's not big on eye contact, or she's just not a physical person for some reason, like because her mother wasn't physical. And I don't want it to like come off as an alarmism where I'm saying, oh, you use so many ways you can fuck your kid up. But like, if you're familiar, are you familiar with Gabor Mate's work?
Yes.
Oh, I love him so much. So he talks a lot about this. Like trauma is something that it's an easy thing for a small human that's developing outside of the womb to experience subtle traumas that can impact the way you attach. Yeah. And the mother is just, that's the human that you came into this world with. And so you're naturally going to have this unique relationship to your mother. Even if she's not around, you're still going to have that hunger for her presence, for her body. Your nervous system cannot regulate itself without your mother's body or your care provider's body. And so you're an extension of whoever it is that's caring for you.
Yeah. And I think for her and just my family as a whole, there was just like this lack of presence. Like I had them there, and on the outside, it looked like this perfect family. But on the inside, there was just so much depth lacking and intimacy with one another. And so that's something that you mentioned earlier, like emotional intimacy and safety. Like that's something I'm so big on in every single relationship I carry today, because I just felt like that wasn't something that I had as a child. And so I want that to be very different in my community today and with my family in the future. So yeah. Wow. Where to go from here? I feel like there's so much that we covered already. I guess I want to kind of bring it back to like, how is everything that we're talking about, trauma, sex, relationships, attachment styles, why is this so important for women's health?
Yeah. Well, women are very social creatures. And so humans in general are, but women specifically, like historically, we've worked together. We're the communicators, we're the nurturers, we're the care providers. So that, I think that's a deep need that a lot of us have, that's like deeply seated in us that we forget we need. And obviously women will need that, individuals will need that to varying degrees, but it's not something that most of us were raised around in our nuclear families. And like you're saying, like you kind of had these like kind of toxic unconscious relationships with women. A lot of women have that. Like a lot of women have relationships that are based on like partying or kind of competing with each other or vanity. And so for that reason, there's like a deep need there that's not being met. And then biologically, women are more sensitive to attachment because we are more vulnerable to, if our mate leaves and we're left alone with our baby, like there's a real need there for our mates to stick around and for, just attachment in general, because we have to attach to our babies to care for them, to like keep them alive. And so I just think that there's so much that happens in our bodies biochemically, like neurochemically, that makes us more sensitive and vulnerable to attachment wounds, but also like insecure relationships. And we're living in a time right now that is really unique in the sense that like women have we've elevated ourselves to these levels where we're outpacing men in a lot of ways, and we're also competing with men in a lot of ways. And for that reason, like this is a very fascinating topic, like female hypergamy. I don't know if you've heard of that before.
I haven't.
Yeah, so mating behaviors are so fascinating. So women mate up and across in the mating hierarchy. Men date down and across, and that means like mating hierarchy in the sense of like how much power does someone have, how much competency does someone have, like how attractive for mating someone is. And so for that reason, as women continue to go up in competency and can run their own lives, there's less and less viable mates that they have that they would choose from. So what we're seeing now is we're seeing a whole slew of women that are going for a very small proportion of men at the top. And for that reason, there's a lot of women that are not in stable, secure relationships because men have more options and they're less likely to commit. So right now we have a lot of women that are unclear around how to create safety and security within a relationship, because it's not something like casual sex and non-commitment relationships are like at an all-time high. And they're usually like for instance, polyamory. So it's like a soapbox I could stand on and talk about a lot. I think there's a lot of problems with it. I think there's beautiful elements of it and it works for some people, but it's trending right now, especially in like more liberal areas, like where I live in California. And the vast majority of it is driven by men. And I think that a lot of it is not because like men are more evolved and suddenly they can handle being in a really deep committed relationship with more than one person. I think it's because we have more options and committing is less appealing nowadays. And so commitment doesn't necessarily have to mean like it has looked throughout history. Like, we commit to this very kind of rigid monogamous structure for long term. But I do think that like the emotional and like the nervous system piece, and that's contingent upon commitment. Like women have to be with someone that they feel safe with, that they feel like is not just going to bail, and that they feel like sees them and is like present with them. Like I think women really need like a deep level of presence, like David Data talks about. That in and of itself is a commitment. And I don't think it's a skill set that a lot of people have these days, because everyone's distracted, everyone's like on their phones looking for the next like shiny, brightest object. And so I think this is a really big issue for women. And a lot of my clients are either feel really grateful because they're in a secure relationship with someone who's helping them heal, or they're intentionally single because it stresses them out to be with someone that can't help them heal. Obviously that's like not everyone, but that seems to be the category of a lot of the women that come to work with me. Because women that work, come to do the work that we're doing, they tend to be intentional, like they want to work on their health. Like it's a specific kind of woman that comes, that's not a health coach and a nutritionist to do this work. And I think there's a lot of women out there that are just confused, like they're on birth control, they're having casual sex, they get insecurely attached to someone that doesn't treat them well. It affects their health. It affects how they feed themselves, how well they care for themselves, and also like their perceived value. Again, like to go back to this value hierarchy, if you wanted to like rate, there is actually like a rating system that some people apply. I don't think that everyone uses it consciously, but like you've probably seen these things, these memes floating around on Instagram. He's a 10, but
yes.
I actually created one. I haven't like posted it yet, but I created one just because it was fun. I thought it would be fun, but I was like, that's a very like superficial way of approaching humans. But there is actually like a rating system, and I have like some male engineering friends that like talk about it. Like they actually like are cognizant of it when they're dating. And what I think, what I would love to support women with, and what I think is really important, is helping women understand that like this kind of more superficial idea of the rating system and of value in general, like status, money, appearance, that shit is not that important. Like to be a high value woman, in my mind, it's like you want to heal yourselves. You want to understand your biology. You're not just going to have casual, unprotected sex with some random guy off the internet. Not because that's inherently immoral in my standards, but because that's not actually serving you. Like could potentially harm your health, and it also doesn't actually meet your needs for safety so that you can have really good connected sex. And so same thing with like taking control of your fertility and not outsourcing it, taking responsibility, I should say, for your well-being and not outsourcing it to pharmaceuticals or a crash diet or something. Like there's these different levels of like choosing to be a valuable woman that have nothing to do with like these very, I don't know, superficial and sometimes toxic metrics that we get taught to like place value in. And so I think it's really, really important for women, because we are in this place where, again, like at this point, women are the gatekeepers to sex and men are the gatekeepers to relationships. Like that's where we're at right now in modern industrial society. And women often are not taught what it means to be a gatekeeper to sex, like why that's so important. We've got like really conservative views around morality and purity. And then we've got like really liberal views that are just like, go on Tinder and have sex and that's, so there's not really a lot of like nuance and understanding like who you choose to invest your energy in, to love, to like sync your nervous system up with, is actually like a health investment. And it's gonna impact your health. And so I think that's just really, really important stuff for us to talk about and understand.
Yeah. Really, really important stuff. Everything you just named, I'm like, wow, like I've been wanting to have this conversation with someone for a very, very long time. I'm like, someone please talk to me about this stuff, because these things are just spinning around in my mind like all day and I don't have anyone to talk to them about. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. I love what you said about hunger, because I think a lot of the women that I see in practice who aren't feeling well, have poor digestion, hormonal imbalances, don't have periods, fertility issues, etc. Not saying this is the only factor, but I think that there is like a deeper hunger for something that they might not even be aware of yet. Like, and that's what's so beautiful about this journey. Like, I had no idea there's like deep hungers and deep desires within me. I was just focused on trying to like feel better. Right. Yeah. And that's beautiful. But I love being in this space. That's why I call this like, it is a lifestyle, right? It's not just like, okay, give me a protocol and I feel better. No, this is about to change your fucking life. Like in so many different ways. The more you spend time in this space, the more you get exposed to. And not that it's like culty or that you should never just go live your life and you should just keep learning. Like obviously there's a time for learning and there's a time for like integrating and everything that you've learned. But I just think it's really beautiful, all the places that this space has led me to, like David Data, masculine and feminine, and just like digging deeper into that space, because honestly, not having those two polarities within me or having like a healthy relationship between the two is kind of what also contributed to the health issues. And having sex with people who were not serving me and my highest good or my health and my well-being, my womb. All of it. It makes a big difference. So I really hope this conversation inspired who it needed to.
Yeah.
I'm really
Yeah,
curious. Go ahead.
I was just gonna, can I add one more little detail?
Absolutely.
I keep it little because I'm verbose. So the approach that I take in this umbrella term pro-metabolic, like bioenergetic, that's, you know, a lot more people are becoming aware of. So I've had so many women either come to me because they've heard me in a podcast or consult with me and tell me that this work is deep, like that they thought that they had healed all of these things about their body dysmorphia, or just feeling like they have to be 0% body fat or fix themselves, get rid of their symptoms. A very masculine approach to healing and to body care. And then realizing once they took on this more pro-metabolic, like, let's heal from the cells out, let's address the stress, let's address the nervous system piece. They realized they have a lot more work to do, and that it was actually a lot of their issues were hiding underneath control and rules.
Yeah.
So I think that there's so much depth here in the healing process that involves the food and the nourishment piece and the emotional and the energetic piece. And again, to go back to like why women need to differentiate themselves from men, like our health, we don't want to be 0% body fat. Like we don't want to look hot, like being taught as a young girl that the sole focus should be to seek hotness and to get validation for hotness instead of seeking beauty, like for all the things that means, and creating value around beauty. Those are two very different feelings and two very different paths that will lead us to different behaviors. And so this approach, this like all-encompassing approach to, improving a female metabolism is not the quick path to hotness.
Yeah.
Like you get to kind of see that path burn down. Like as you're doing this work, you realize like that's not where it's at.
Yeah.
That's to burnout and to dissociation.
Yep.
And we need to train men to value another path. Mm-hmm. So that they're no longer just seeking like little hot women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that needs to change. Yeah. And I honestly feel like this space is kind of like the end of the chasing, like when I first found pro-metabolic, I was like, I feel like this is like freedom. Like for once, like it finally felt like freedom. And then when because I had done my emotional work, or I thought I was starting it before I found pro-metabolic. And then I kept making all these changes and I felt good. But then I kept like being hit in the face by like how important emotional work was on top of the pro-metabolic and nourishing your cells and everything. And what you just said is so beautiful because it's so right. It's an all-encompassing approach, and it is so deep. And because it is so deep, it is so beautiful. And so I find everyone who stumbles across this space, and it has grown like tremendously. Sometimes I'm like, whoa, that's crazy. Yeah, it's grown tremendously. And I really hope that everyone kind of receives this message and passes it along to someone who really needs it, that there is healing, like true healing possible. And you don't have to do anything super crazy or trendy to feel good in your body. Because at the end of the day, I think that's what we're trying to achieve. You may want to reach these superficial goals of like looking this way aesthetically or whatever, but that's not truly what your heart wants.
Feeling.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a beautiful episode, Kymber. Thank you so much. I'm curious with I feel like what you just said, I'm just like, whoa, what does this girl have in the works? What are you working on? Any projects? You mentioned some courses and ebooks and stuff.
Yeah, so I have a comprehensive women's health course, and it's super affordable, and that's called Habitually Healthy. And it's kind of like you do it at your own pace, and you can find that. I'll send you a link for that. And then I also have an ebook, and I offer private coaching subscriptions to women. And that's currently, I'm in the process of moving my life. Like I'm moving back to Berkeley, California. So right now I'm not really working on projects. I'm just maintaining, and then I'm sure I'll be doing more launches for my course, like in the next, once I'm settled in the new year, in the fall and the new year. But I also just love to hear from women. So like anyone who listens to this podcast, anyone who like is spoken to by anything that I said, I love feedback. I love connection with women who have gone through similar things. I feel like we learn through communication, through stories. And so that's, so even if you don't feel called to work with me, if you feel called to share with me some aspect of your life that was touched by this podcast, then that's, I think, a success right there.
We love that. And what's your Instagram handle again? Kymber Maulden.
Kymber Maulden. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. We will link all of that in the show notes. Thanks to everyone who listened. Until next time, guys. Bye.